Hi everybody, welcome to our live event. My name is Brenda KB Anderson. I'm a crochet designer and instructor, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make the Wonderland hooded gaiter. So this is what it looks like over here. I'm going to just pull this off of our little model here and show you what it looks like flat. So we have just a hood and a drawstring, some little grommets here, so you can cinch it up close around your face if you like. And then if you take it off, pull it back behind you, you can see that there's the scarf that you can wear all the way up over your ears, even over your nose, and so it's super warm. Okay, it's like a double layered hooded gaiter situation here. And we're going to be working this up in the alpine stitch, which is this lovely textured stitch. It has some nice stretch and drape to it. And then this stitch pattern is just stretchy ribbing that we're going to be making with a variation of a slip stitch here. So I'm going to be walking you through all the steps you need to know in order to make this hood. Definitely download the pattern so you can follow along. I'm not going to be giving out like stitch counts or specific rows or anything like that in this video. I'm just mostly going to be showing you like all the steps that you're going to be going through in the order that you need to work them up. And I'm going to be doing some like a very small, much smaller sample so that we can kind of get through this in this 1 hour time frame that we have here today. So if you guys have any questions about anything I'm doing, if you have any comments, if you have suggestions for future live events, I love it when you guys put that in the chat, or if you just want to say hi to me, that would be great too. So this project, I have to thank, I believe it was Lori who suggested this. Lori said that they would really like me to design something that could basically cover up everything on her head except for her eyes. So this is what I came up with. I really like the idea of making this sort of loose hood that you could cinch in closer if you wanted to, and then that gaiter that pulls up over your face, so that way you can have all these different options for like how cold it is outside. You can pull the gaiter all the way up and the hood and pull on the drawstring, or if you're warmer, you can scrunch down the gaiter lower on your neck and you can pull the hood off and it could just kind of hang behind you. So you got a lot of different varieties of warmth here with this gaiter, this hooded gaiter. So, all right. So let's talk about the materials that we're going to be needing. Here, I'll pop this back on my little head form here so you guys can see what it looks like. All right, so I'm going to be using a worsted weight. It is 80% acrylic, 20% wool. All of the details of exactly the color that I use, the brand, the exact yardage and all that can be found in your download. But I'm going to be using this worsted weight, which is this, a CYC number 4 weight yarn. And so if you want to substitute with something else, you could use 100% acrylic, you could use 100% wool, you could use something with alpaca, which is extremely warm. That would be really great. Some kind of blend of any of those fibers put together is great. You just want to make sure that you're choosing a fiber that has at least some kind of loft to it, at least some sort of squishiness and warmth to it. Like not 100% cotton or something like that. That would not work. Plus that would be kind of heavy. This is a very dense stitch pattern, so the acrylic and the wool, those are much lighter fibers than it would be in a more dense fiber like a cotton. I should mention that there are basically 3 sizes for this gaiter. So there's a small, medium, and large. The small is for like the younger kids. A medium will fit most adults and most like older kids up through adults, because really our head sizes aren't really that different from basically from kids up through like average adult. And then there is a larger size, and that's made for people who need a little bit of extra width around, like maybe if you have a lot of like thick hair that you're trying to pull the gaiter over, then it would be a little bit bigger for you. But also, besides those 3 sizes, I do have an option for a closer fitting hood. So this hood was designed to be sort of like a cloak, a hood that kind of hangs down and sort of swoops around on your shoulders a little bit. If you want you know, if you're going to be using this for, you know, like if you're going skiing or some kind of athletic purpose, you probably want to make the smaller hood just because it's not going to move around on your head as much. This is just sort of meant to set on top of your head if you're, you know, going for a walk in the woods or whatever kind of lower impact exercise outside. But just know that there are options written throughout the pattern for making a closer fitting hood. It's not, I wouldn't say it's close fitting, but it definitely less fabric in it than the version that I'm going to be showing you right here. Okay, so besides the yarn, so you're going to need about, let's see, somewhere between 660 and 770 yards. So that would be for the larger hood. For the smaller hood, you'd need less than those. It just depends on what size you're working up. And then you're going to need 2 different size hooks. I'm using a G hook, which is a 4mm hook, and that's going to be used for the ribbed gaiter. For the gaiter section of it, the ribbing. Kind of the neck warmer thing on the inside. And then the rest of it, so the hood and then the ribbing that goes around the face, that's going to be a 5mm hook, which is an H. That's what I'm using, but you can use whatever hook you need to in order to get the same gauge that I have listed in my pattern. I also do have instructions for making the gauge swatch and the alpine stitch pattern if you'd like to follow those. I'm not going to be showing you how to do those because you can watch the alpine stitch pattern when we get to that point in this project. I don't have enough time to do every single part of this. So I'm giving you all of the information from beginning to end of all the different steps you need and the stitch patterns and all that stuff. So. Okay, and then stitch markers are also very helpful for marking the beginnings of the round or the ends of your rows. Also, we're going to be doing just a little bit of seaming, just one seam where we sew a little bit of ribbing into the hole that's for the face. And so the stitch markers are useful to use as pins at that point as well. If you don't have stitch markers, you can use safety pins or something else. That will work just fine. And also, we're going to be using these grommets. So these are hammer-in style grommets. And I did put a link in the pattern download so that you could see exactly what I'm using here. But these are the grommets I'm going to be using. So each grommet has 2 halves, okay? The half with the sort of height to it, the thickness for the thickness of the fabric, and then the sort of flat donut shape other half. That's what we're gonna be using this size, which I think it's a 1/2 inch size. Let me just double check here. 3/8 inch inner diameter. Okay, so that's the inner diameter from one edge to the other of the inside hole of this grommet. So that's the size we're going to be using, and also you're going to need a way to set the grommets. So this whole kit is what I linked, so you can see exactly what I'm using here. You can see the tools that I'm using and the grommets as well. But you can certainly substitute with a different grommet. You know, if you already have grommets or a different way of setting them, that's perfectly fine too. If you are not interested in using the grommets, you can do this without the grommets. You can just leave one, like a little hole, make a chain space in your ribbing. So in this little section where we do the ribbing back and forth and turn rows, you can just make a little chain 1 space here and here, like near each end of this ribbed section. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later. And then you can just not use the grommet. I feel like the grommet just sort of adds to, it just looks a little more professional, and also when you're pulling on those drawstrings, it's not going to sort of eat away at the yarn, the space that it's slipping through, if that makes sense. And then you'll also need a safety pin of some sort. You could probably use a stitch marker for this if you don't have a safety pin, but I'm going to be using this to feed my drawstring through the ribbed, this little ribbing section. So we're going to feed a little drawstring that we crochet through those holes. So. Let's see. I think that's it for materials. Oh, and you'll need a hammer to set in your snaps if that's the way that not snaps, your grommets. So I've got my little hammer here as well. Okay, so let's see. What yarn did I use? Okay, so the information for the yarn, the brand, and everything is found in your download. I used let's see, this is wool ease, a worsted weight wool ease, and then the sample that I'm using today, this is impeccable. I feel like the wool ease, if I had to do this again, I would use the wool ease because I feel like it was a little bit more warm and plump. I liked that one a little bit better. But all the details, everything, that's all in your download, so you can check that out if you want to know like color numbers, exact, all the information about the yarn. So let's see. Oh, and we've got a hello from Austin, Texas. Hi, Rita or Retta. Hello. Thanks for saying hi. Oh, yes. And Becky is saying that would be most welcomed in Alaska's cold and windy winter. Yeah. Certainly would. That is, yeah. I feel like, as much as Minnesotans complain about the cold weather, the cold here is nothing compared to Alaska. Okay. So let's get started working up our little ribbed section here. So actually, I'm going to pull this in here so you guys can see where we're going. So you can see the steps that we're going to be taking. So when we start this out, we're going to be working on the ribbed section first. So we're going to be working this section back and forth in turned rows, okay, like this. And we are going to make a long rectangle, and then we're going to put that rectangle into a tube. And then after we make our tube, then we're going to be working the alpine stitch in the round here. And then we're going to start working the alpine stitch back and forth in turned rows. So in order to make the stitch pattern look the same when we work in the round and work in turned rows, we are actually going to be working the part that's in the round in something called joined turned rows. So the stitch pattern is worked with right side facing, then wrong side facing, then right side facing, but we're joining our rounds. And if that makes no sense to you, that's okay, we're gonna get to that. I just kind of wanted to give you guys a little preview of where we're going. Okay, and this chunk, is all made in one piece, and then we're going to make this little ribbed piece that I showed you earlier. This is to kind of go around the hole and for the face, and that will get stitched in. So. And then the other little piece we're making is the drawstring, which is right here. Okay, so we're going to start out with the gaiter, the ribbed section, and we're going to be working that in something called slip stitch through the back loop only, or actually yarn over slip stitch through the back loop only. So we're going to grab the smaller hook, and you can go ahead and do a gauge swatch. I do list what my gauge was for the ribbing and also for the alpine stitch, and you can go ahead and check that first. You can also, if you're feeling daring, you can start working on the ribbed section first, but make sure you actually are measuring that at some point because you want to make sure that you're really getting this to be the size that you need it to be. Okay, so we're going to place a slip knot on our hook, and then you're going to chain the appropriate number of stitches. I believe it's something like 48 stitches or something like that. Let me look. But in this, just for the purposes of showing you how to make these pieces, I'm not going to be doing a full size. Oh yeah, okay. So you're going to be either chaining 44 or 49 stitches, just depending on what size you're making. And if you do need some help learning how to read a pattern, I do put a link in your download so that you can watch another video where I explain to you how to read a crochet pattern, how to follow a pattern if that's something that's new to you. Okay, so we're just going to chain some just to get us, a little section so you can see how to work up the stitch pattern. But if you were making this, this gaiter, you'd be chaining, somewhere between 44 and 49 chains. All right, that looks pretty good for me. So your chain would be much longer. It would be, as long as your gaiter is going to be tall because you're working it sideways in turned rows. And now we're going to start in the second chain from the hook. And we're going to work into the bottom of the chain. So if you lay your chain on the table, you can see there's a whole bunch of V's all stacked up like this. If you roll those over so the V's are touching the table, you'll see these little horizontal dashes on the back of the chain, and that's what we're going to work under. So we're going to skip the very first one. We're going to work under the second one. So we're going to make a yarn over, and then we're going to insert our hook, and we're going to yarn over again and pull up a loop. And then we're going to continue pulling that same loop through the two loops that were on our hook. So this is different than a half double crochet. I think people oftentimes get a little confused because it starts out looking like you're going to do a half double crochet. but we're doing one fewer yarn over than in a half double crochet. So just make sure you take your time and actually watch what you're doing, because if you're someone who's crocheted a bunch before and you've done half double crochets, you might accidentally just start doing those. Okay, so you're going to yarn over, insert into the next chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, and continue pulling that loop through the 2 loops on the hook. So let's do that again. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, and pull that same loop through the 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, and pull through the 2 loops on your hook. So we're going to do that all the way across our foundation chain. And if you're having any trouble working into this chain, if you're a little newer to crochet, sometimes you can just make your chain with a hook that's one size up and then switch to the smaller hook to do your first row. That can sometimes help. It's very common. I can say though that it is easier if you're having a hard time getting your hook in, it's easier just to pull it out and make the chains again, because you can make chains fairly quickly, but working into chains that are too tight is very frustrating. It really does slow you down. Okay, so here's my last stitch that I have. You will have worked all the way across your chain, so you'll have, a much longer piece. And we're going to chain 1, turn our work, just like we're turning a page in a book. And now we're going to start doing the yarn over slip stitch, but we're going to work underneath just the back loop of our stitch. So what that means is, so this is where we would insert our hook to make our stitch. And normally we go underneath both loops of that little V on top. But now we're going to go under just the back loop, which is right here. All right, so we're going to yarn over, and we're not going to work into that turning chain. That turning chain doesn't count as a stitch. We just make the turning chain at the ends of our rows, and then we just forget about it. And then we're going to work a yarn over and then insert through the back loop of that very first stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull that same loop through the 2 loops on our hook. Yarn over, insert through the back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through the 2 loops on our hook. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, and pull through the 2 loops. All right, so we're just going to continue making this. This is called the yarn over slip stitch through the back loop only, or through the back loop. And we're going to work this all the way across our row. And working it through the back loop, that allows it to be stretchier. It also gives it that ribbed appearance. So you'll start to see those little ridges appearing as you work a few more rows. All right, now we're at the end, so we're going to chain 1, and I like to do those chain 1s pretty tightly. You're never going to work into them, so working them pretty tightly just makes your edge a little bit tighter. And then we're going to turn our work, and we're going to do the same stitch. So yarn over, insert through the back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through those 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, and pull through 2. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, and pull through 2. And if you're having trouble with your stitches getting to be too tight, this sometimes happens when people are working up slip stitches, then really slow down and see where your loops are getting tight. If you go through, get that loop, and if you pull through here and pull too much in this direction, sometimes this loop will get smaller. See, you can see how that loop is getting tighter and tighter right there. And it gets a little bit harder to work into. Normally the yarn over slip stitch through the back loop only, that one isn't quite as problematic as a regular slip stitch through the back loop. So if you've done a slip stitch pattern before and you've gotten frustrated by working through that back loop, this one is a little different. So don't let that scare you away. And this stitch pattern, it does take a little bit of time because it's not a particularly tall stitch pattern. It's not like we're doing a half double crochet or double crochet here. It is a fairly short stitch. It's probably about the size of a regular single crochet, maybe even a tiny bit shorter than that. So it does take, you do have to have a little bit of patience, but the fabric that it makes is very stretchy and it springs back into shape really well and it looks really nice. So I find it to be completely worth it. And this is only a section of your cowl. You know, this is just the neck part of it. The rest of it will be in that fun textured alpine stitch pattern. All right, so you're just going to continue working this rectangle back and forth and turned rows until you have worked the amount of rows that are in your pattern. Let me just pull that in here. Let's see. So you would be working either 72, 80, or 88 rows, and then once you've done that, then you can turn it into a tube. So we're just going to pretend this is a tiny little sample here. You know, it would be much wider. It will also be much, much longer. And we're just going to pretend that we've reached our appropriate number of rows for our size. So let's just say we just finished up working that very last stitch. Then we would chain one, turn our work as if we're going to work another row. And then we're going to bring that foundation chain up in front of the last row we worked. Okay, so they're just folded. This piece is folded, so you've got one edge right on top of the other, and we're going to slip stitch seam these together. So what that means is we're going to be going underneath the back loop of the edge in front and the back loop of the edge in back and making a slip stitch. So we're going to insert our hook here under the back and right here under the back of the row behind, grab that yarn, pull through, and pull through that loop. So again, go through the back loop, grab that yarn, pull through, insert, insert, grab that yarn, pull through. So we're not doing a yarn over slip stitch here. This is just a regular slip stitch. So we're going to insert, insert, yarn over, pull through. Okay, so this is going to seam our edges together to create that tube shape. And you can go ahead and try this on. I would definitely recommend that. Or you can measure it to make sure that it's turning out the size that you had intended or want it to be. Because if you continue without checking and then later you try it on at the very end and it's too loose or something like that, it might be frustrating. So it's good to do that now. I like to try things on and test them out as I go all the time. I feel like it really helps, just helps you feel confident about the size and shape everything's turning out. All right, so we've got that slip stitch seam right there. We're going to leave that on the outside of our work, and we're going to just open this tube up, and we're going to work around the top edge of our tube. So later on, this tube will get flipped to the inside of our gaiter, and we're not going to see this seam, so don't worry about that. Okay, so now at this point, we're going to switch to a hook size that's one size larger. So I'm going to bring in my H hook. This is a 5mm hook here. And then I'm going to chain one right here. And then I'm going to start working double crochets all the way around. So if you take a look at your ribbing, you'll see that you have these sort of ridges, like here's a ridge, and then there's a little groove right before it. So groove, ridge, groove, ridge, groove, ridge. We're going to be making a double crochet into each groove and each ridge around if you're making a size small or a size medium, okay? If you are making a size large, or if you're making the smaller circumference, a closer fitting hood, then we're going to have a different approach. So let me explain that approach before we move on. Let's see. Yep, okay. So this is all written out in your pattern, so if you don't have to remember exactly what I'm saying, but I just want to make sure that that this is going to make sense to you when you get to this part. So if you are making one of the closer fitting hoods, or if you are making the size large, then what you're going to do is you're going to divide the top edge of your tube, your gaiter, into 4 equal sections. Okay, so we're going to count this beginning loop here. That's going to be 1 point, and we're going to fold it flat, so that's at one side. So there's our loop, and here's the opposite edge. We're going to place a stitch marker directly across from that loop, like this. And then we're going to open this up again and match up the loop with our stitch marker. Okay, so they're right on top of each other, and now we can place another, I just randomly have a bead here. Okay, and then you can place another stitch marker in the folded edge here, and then one directly opposite that marked stitch or marked area right over here on this fold. And that will give you 4 equal sections. If you're looking down on this cuff here, you can see them 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and then you're going to just evenly distribute your stitches in those sections. Now, your cowl, of course, is not going to be this small. This is very tiny. This is like if I was making it for Labubu or something. Yours is going to be quite a bit bigger. So you're going to have a longer space to go. So you can further divide the space between your stitch markers if you'd like to. If you feel like that's going to help you keep on track, you can go ahead and do that. Just make sure if you're going to further divide them, divide each section in half. Okay, so put one here, 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 and here. And then you're going to divide the stitches that I tell you go in section 1. So for example, let's just say you were making a smaller, closer fitting hood for a size small or medium. Okay, and then you would make 15 or 17 double crochets into each marked section once you divide it into 4. So for the smaller size, you'd make 15 between each marked section. If you were making the medium, you'd do 17 in each marked section. But if you're going to further divide those in half, 15 and 17 don't exactly divide in half, but that's okay because you can just divide that mostly in half. So it would be like 8 stitches in one section and 7 in the next, and then together those make 15. Okay, so it doesn't have to be perfect, is I guess what I'm trying to say. So then when you're working your stitches up, you're just going to kind of eyeball that, like, if you had a certain amount of stitches between here and here, you just start working across and making sure that you can fit that amount of stitches in between here and here. Now, if you are making the looser fitting hood, like I'm showing you, the one that's in the pictures, the one that's in the sample, I call that the standard looser fitting hood. If you're doing that, you don't have to mark this because it's much simpler for you. You're just going to place a double crochet into each ridge and each groove. Okay, so you would to do a double crochet, you would yarn over, and then we're going to insert in this groove here. Yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and that is our very first stitch of the round. Regardless of which method you're using to space your stitches, you're going to place a stitch marker there just so that you know that's the first stitch of the round. And then we're going to do a double crochet in the next ridge. Okay, so that's right here. So there's our double crochet, and then we're going to do a double crochet in the edge between our ridges in that little valley there. And then we're going to do one here in this ridge. Okay, so each of those ridges or valleys between, each of those gets one stitch. Each of those is one row, actually. So we're working one stitch into each row end. And remember, you've switched to that larger hook size. All right, so I'm just going to continue placing one double crochet into each ridge or valley all the way around. And if you were making one of those other sizes where you divide it into 4, you already know how many stitches you need to make, and you don't have to worry about placing a double crochet into each row end. You're just going to kind of evenly distribute them across the edge. I do find, though, that if you work into those ridges, it really looks nice. So I don't normally skip the ridges. I usually skip the valleys if I don't, if I'm making one of those sizes where you're dividing the top into those 4 equal sections and you have to count out your stitches. So I'm just placing my hook into an area that is close to the edge and where it looks nice. And when I make the stitch, if it doesn't pull into a bigger hole, like if it doesn't cause a big hole to happen, then it's fine. If it does create a larger hole, then try a different spot. Maybe look for a spot with your hook that's a little bit tighter, like a little bit more densely stitched area, then that might look a little bit better. But it's really not, you're not looking for a very specific spot to insert your hook. It's not like it has to be under this loop or under that loop. It's just kind of in the edge. All right, I'm going to catch up on my comments here while I'm doing this. Oh, we've got a hello from Austin, Texas, and so cozy for Wakadago. Yep. Maybe you should make one for your dog. Just kidding. I'm sure your dog would probably not like that very much. And you're welcome, Margaret. I'm glad you love it. Okay, so I've gone all the way around to that very last groove between ridges here. And now I'm going to make a slip stitch in the very first double crochet I made, which I had marked. So we're going to make a slip stitch here. So we just grab that yarn, pull through, and pull through. Then we're going to chain one. And this is where we start doing those turned rounds that I was talking about. So we chain one, and we want to work back and forth as though we're working this flat, but we want to work it in a tube. So when we do that, we join, and then we turn, and then we're just going to start working in this direction for this round. Now, this right here, we're going to skip this stitch, or this chain right here, because that's a turning chain. We're also skipping this little chain here, right here, because that was our slip stitch join. That doesn't actually count as a stitch. We're not going to work into it. So we're not working into this, we're not working into this. So that's two things to skip, and we're going to work right here into that very first stitch. And we're going to make a single crochet. So we're going to do a single crochet in each stitch around. So there's our first one. And we're going to create a single crochet in each stitch around. Now just, keep in mind this is going to be much larger because you're making it for a human. But we're just placing one single crochet into each stitch around. Just have a few more stitches left. All right, so your last single crochet should look like there's something kind of worked into it a little bit because that's where you had done your slip stitch join. So we're gonna, that's how you know you're in the last one. So you do your single crochet there, and then we're going to make a slip stitch join into the very top of that first single crochet. So here's our slip stitch join. That's not gonna count as a stitch. We're gonna chain one and turn. That's also not gonna count as a stitch. So we skip that turning chain, skip that slip stitch, and we are going to start working in the post stitch pattern. So in order to work in the alpine stitch, we're going to be working in the row below that single crochet row sometimes, and then sometimes into that single crochet row. So let me just double check and make sure we're starting out with the right stitch. Okay. Yep, the row below. Okay, so we're in round number 3 of the hood. So we're going to be working down here in this, around this post. So to know where we're at, so we're skipping that chain, that turning chain. We're skipping the slip stitch. This is the single crochet that we would be working in, but we're really going to be dropping down here directly below it, and we're going to work around this post. So to do that, we're going to yarn over. Then we're going to insert from right to left around the back of that post. We're going to yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, so that is called a front post double crochet. And then after that, we're going to make a regular double crochet into the row of single crochets. So if you look at the row that you would be working in, we're skipping that single crochet because we worked a post stitch down in front of it. So that counts as though we worked that stitch. So now we're going to work into that next stitch, and we're going to place a double crochet. So yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now we're going to do a double crochet in the a front post double crochet in the row below, which is down here. Okay, so this is that double crochet row that we had done. So we're going to go from right to left around the back, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. If you are a left-handed crocheter, you can flip your screen or watch it flipped, and you'll be inserting your hook, from left to right around those posts. All right, now we're gonna do a double crochet in the working row. Okay, so again, we're skipping the stitch behind the post stitch that we just made. So there's our double crochet in the working row, and then a front post double crochet in the row below. So a double crochet in the working row, a front post double crochet in the row below. Okay, so we're working in the working row here, and then we're reaching down and working down below into those double crochets. So we're just doing every other stitch. I'm just alternating all the way around. All right, I'm just going to add a little piece of yarn because I'm running out. All right, so this is me. This is how I like to add my yarn sometimes. I will just kind of lay it along with what I'm working on and just stitch with it. Stitch with both of them for a couple of stitches. So here's my double crochet in the working row. And it is a little thicker, but like for one stitch like that, it's not really very noticeable, and that really anchors your yarn really well. It's not going to slip out as you're stitching, and you have less weaving in to do later. You should still weave it in somewhat, but it does help everything kind of stay in place. But you can, of course, add your yarn however you like. I just wanted to explain what I was doing because that's not always the way that people do it. Okay, so we're still alternating back and forth between doing that front post double crochet in the row below and working a double crochet in the current row, in that single crochet row. And here is our last double crochet. Right there. Okay, so you should end with a regular double crochet in the current row, and then you're going to do a slip stitch into the top of that front post double crochet from the row below, that very first stitch you did in this round. Let's do our slip stitch here, then we're going to chain one, and we're going to turn our work. So we're skipping the chain one, we're skipping the slip stitch, and we're going to work a single crochet into each stitch around. So when we work those double crochets in the working row, they kind of get squished down a little bit because our post stitches in the row below kind of pulls your fabric down. And that creates a warmer fabric. It's a little bit thicker than usual, even thicker than just a normal post stitch fabric, I feel like, because it's kind of being squished down. All right, and then your last single crochet should be in the stitch that kind of shares that slip stitch. All right. And then we're going to do a slip stitch to the very first single crochet of the row. Let me see here. Yep. So that's right here. There's our slip stitch. We're going to chain one, and we're going to turn our work. Now in the last post stitch row that we did, we started out with the front post stitch in the row below. This time we're going to start out with a double crochet into our working row. So we're going to make yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through two, yarn over, pull through two. Okay, so there's our very first stitch of the round is a regular double crochet in the working row. Now we're going to do a front post double crochet in the row below, which is right here. So these are the double crochets now that we worked on the row when we first started alternating between double crochets and those post stitches dropped below. Okay, so we made these double crochets then. And now we're going to be working a post stitch into all of those double crochets. So double crochet in the row the working row, so that would be into one of the single crochets. Then we're going to drop down and make a double crochet into the double crochet from the row below. Double crochet into the single crochet row, a front post double crochet into the round below. Okay, so now we're alternating, but because we started with a double crochet instead of a double crochet in the row below, these are offset from the last round of post stitches that we had done. So here's a post stitch here, there's a post stitch there, and there's one kind of like situated in between in the round that we're doing right now. So that's how you know that you're getting your post stitches in the right spot. It should be between the post stitches that already existed from, you know, a couple rows before. All right. So in your pattern, you're going to do a few rounds of excuse me, of doing these joined turned rounds. And so after you've done, I think it's like round 6 or so, you'll just have to refer to your pattern, but after doing a short amount of joining and turning, that's when we're going to start separating and just working back and forth in turned rows and leaving a spot open for, you know, where your face will be. So let me get around here and we'll talk about that a little bit here. And here is our last double crochet in the round below. And then we're going to do a slip stitch join to that very first double crochet we made of the round, like that. And then we chain 1 and we're going to turn our work. And then we're going to do single crochets. And then the next round we do, so this is where we start doing the repeats. The next round we do after this round of single crochets, our post stitches will line up directly above from the very first round of making those dropped post stitches, those post stitches in the row below. So they'll be directly above that. But I want to jump ahead just a little bit because once you've turned back and forth and turned rows, there's going to be there's a little line in your pattern that tells you where to place some stitch markers. So let's see. Separating right and left sides. Okay, so I want to call your attention to, let's see. Oh, not quite there yet. Okay. So there's a section beginning on page number 6 where you are working, you're asked to place some markers. That's what the PM stands for in your pattern. So you're going to work, you're following this pattern, the same alpine stitch pattern. You're going to start with that double crochet in the row below, and then you're going to do a double crochet. And you're going to do that a certain amount of times, and you're going to place 2 stitch markers in the post stitch just made. That's what it says here. And then you're going to do some more repeats, and then you're going to do another, you're going to place another stitch marker in the post stitch that you made, and then you finish up your round. So let's just, actually maybe we'll just get to that section. We'll just get to that section so that'll make it a little bit more clear to you. I'm going to just kind of speed along here and finish this single crochet round. And we are actually going to be, let's see, where's the end of my round here? Oh, almost there. Okay, There's my last single crochet. I'm going to do a slip stitch, chain one, turn my work, and now we're working that round that I was just talking about, round number 7. So this is where you place some stitch markers, and that's going to show you basically where the opening is for the front of the face. So it tells you how many stitches to repeat. So we're going to start out here working that post stitch in the row below. And then we're going to do a double crochet in the working row, a post stitch in the row below. So this is still continuing in that alpine stitch pattern. And it's going to tell you a certain amount of times to repeat the sequence of working below, working in the row above, working below, working in the row above. Okay, and then at some point it's going to tell you to place a stitch marker in the stitch you just made. So let's just say that stitch would be here. So we're going to be doing a post stitch in the row below, and then we place a stitch marker into that stitch that we just made. And then we do a few more stitches in the stitch pattern. So we're still working that double crochet in the working row, post stitch in the row below, double crochet in the working row, post stitch in the row below, and then it'll tell you to place another stitch marker. And that stitch marker again is going to go into one of those post stitches worked into the row below. Okay, so you'll have a little space between your stitch markers of a number of stitches here. And then you're going to continue till you get to the end of the round, and then you will slip stitch and then you will fasten off. So let's just say, where's the end of my round? Oh, it's way over there. So I'm going to just fasten off here. But let's just say we were getting to the end of our round. We would just slip stitch into the first stitch, and then we would go ahead and just cut our yarn like this. Okay? I didn't finish that round, but you would have. All right, so you've got these 2 stitch markers. This is actually where you're going to start creating your the face hole, basically. So on the next round, because we finished with a round of doing our post stitches, on the next round we are going to begin on the very first place. Let's see, the very first stitch marker we placed, we actually placed 2 stitch markers. Sorry, I forgot to do that. The first time we were asked to place stitch markers, we placed 2, and that's so we can differentiate between this stitch marker and this stitch marker. So when you start working back and forth and turn rows and you're not joining anymore, you're going to start right there where your double stitch marker is, and you're going to pull up a loop in that stitch like this, and then you're going to make single crochet and work all the way across. So you're going to work around excuse me, around the back of your piece, and you're going to go across where the beginnings of your round used to be. We have actually now changed the beginnings of our rounds to the place opposite of where they used to be. If you notice, we did a number of stitches, and then we placed a stitch marker, and we placed a second stitch marker, and then we finished at the end of our round. And then we fastened off, and then we joined. Okay, this isn't looking, I hope that wasn't confusing because I only worked a partial round there, so hopefully that wasn't too confusing. But you're going to end with your single crochet. Your last single crochet is going to be into that marked stitch, okay, right there. And that's what's going to tell you that this section here, we're going to work this back and forth and back and forth, okay? So you would, chain 1 and turn, and then you would create, it'll tell you in the pattern whether you start with a double crochet in the first stitch, or what I think it is actually double crochet in the first stitch, and then a double crochet in the round below, and you're still continuing in that alpine stitch pattern, okay? And then working in the round below. So you're just going back and forth. And now instead of joining, you're not going to join any longer, you're just going to turn your work and follow in that stitch pattern. So you're going to go back and forth for quite a while. Let's see. Your piece will look something like this, but of course much, much larger. So these were the places we had marked off for the point at which we were going to leave that open. This is the face hole here. And then we've worked this back and forth in those turned rows, continuing in that alpine stitch pattern. And then there's going to be another little section where it's telling you to place some stitch markers once again. So that section, let's see, is for dividing, that's separating the right and the left sides of the hood. So if we look here at row number 34 or 38, just depending on what size you're working on, you're going to place a stitch marker in the 26th or the 30th. You're going to place one stitch marker there, and you're going to place two stitch markers in the 40th or the 44th stitches as you work your way across. So when we're working our way across this row, we're repeating row 2, which is where we start with a double crochet and then do a front post double crochet in the row below. So what that means is we're still continuing to work in our stitch pattern, and we're going to start with that double crochet right here, and then we're going to do a front post double crochet, and we're counting our stitches, okay, as we do this. Or if you can't count as you're doing this, you can kind of stop every once in a while and check in and make sure that you know where you're at. And then you're going to be placing your stitch marker into the, like I said before, into the 26th or the 30th stitch that you make. So let's just say, you know, because this is a very, very small scaled down sort of swatch version of what we're making, it's going to be somewhere close to the center back, but like a number of stitches away, maybe like 5 stitches away or so. So we're going to place the stitch marker here, and then we're going to chain 1 and turn. Oh, actually, sorry, not yet, not until the next row. Okay, yeah, sorry. This row is with the right side facing. We're just going to be placing those stitch markers. We've got to work all the way across the whole thing, placing those stitch markers. So you would put them in, you know, if this was a size medium, you'd put them in the 30th stitch, which would be in a post stitch. Make sure it's post stitch. And then you'd do a few more stitches until it tells you to place your second marker. And let's say, place that here. Place your second marker. Okay, which would be in another post stitch, and then you would continue your way to the end of the row, just continuing in that working stitch pattern. So what these markers are going to tell you, these markers are going to be telling you where you're going to be shaping the back of the hood. So, which sounds complicated, but it's actually very easy. You're just going to be turning your work at that marker. So let me just kind of get to the end here, and I'll show you what I mean. Oops. All right, here is my last double crochet of the row, chain 1, turn my work, and then we're going to be working a single crochet into each stitch, and we're going to land with the last single crochet in that marked stitch, the first one we come to. All right, so here's that marked stitch. That's where we're going to stop, and that's telling us we're just going to work back and forth on this little section for a while. So you continue working in that alpine section. I think there's maybe like 6 rows or something here. And then you fasten off, and then you will come back with the wrong side facing and begin by pulling up a loop right here in that other marked stitch. And you're going to work that section back and forth in those turned rows, and then fasten off. And so what we're creating when we do this, we're just making this little section at the very top of the hood. Here, I'll turn it this way so you guys can see. This is the face. It's laying sideways on the table. This is going to be the top seam in the hood, and then here's like this little back cutout. So once we create our piece, we've got this little notch in it, and we can sew our pieces together. We're going to seam them together. So you can just kind of abut those 2 little edges and do a little whip stitch. And I like to sew across the top of the hood first, and then I go back in and I kind of make this little dart in the back of the hood. oops, I want a blunt tapestry needle. Here, I grabbed the wrong one. Here we go. Oh, may I ask, what part is she working on now? Okay, so right now I am working on the very top of the hood. So we've got the ribbed gaiter part, and then this is the hood. Here is the front opening of the hood right over here. And then I'm gonna be seaming the very top of the hood together. Okay, so actually I'm gonna hold it this way. And I'm gonna do a whip stitch. You could do a mattress stitch. You could do any seam you like across the top of the hood. And you can go ahead and, if you want to, you can pin your pieces together. I don't normally do that because I know it's a 1-to-1 stitch ratio because they have the same amount of stitches on both sides. So I'm just careful to put my needle underneath, you know, the next stitch from each edge. And so I don't bother with the pinning, but if that helps you, you can use those stitch markers to kind of get things pinned in place. So you can make sure everything's getting matched up okay. And you could do a slip stitch seam or something like that here if you really do not like, some people don't love doing the sewing part of finishing projects. But I like how this lays nice and flat. So that's why I chose to do a whip stitch seam here. I like how you can abut those two edges and it just lays really nice and flat. Oh, and I should mention, I did actually steam block this piece. When you are working this up, you're working it up at a fairly tight gauge. You know, the gaiter itself, the tube that goes around your neck, is worked at quite a tight gauge. The hood is slightly looser, but it's still a pretty firm gauge compared to how I normally, normally on a worsted weight yarn, I would use like probably an H or an I. But for something with post stitches, I might even go up another hook size if I wanted it to have more drape. But because I wanted it to be nice and warm, we're using an H hook, which is a 5mm hook, because I wanted to keep the holes from being too large. You know, I just wanted to keep it nice and warm. So then it becomes extra important to do a little bit of steam blocking, especially if you're using an acrylic, or you can do wet blocking if you're using a wool, because that's going to help your fabric have nice drape and kind of fill in those holes even a little bit more. All right, so we have reached the front of our hood. I'm going to go ahead and just sort of weave this in real quick. I would probably take a little more time to do this, but I'm trying to save time here to make sure I can show you guys all the steps. All right, I'm gonna cut that off, and then we have this little section at the back of the hood that needs to be seamed, and we just happen to have a little yarn tail here. If you didn't, you could just grab another strand of yarn and just start sewing and then weave in both ends later. So with this, we're sewing this edge of our stitches to the sides of our rows here, but that's perfectly fine. We just need to kind of this actually might help, since it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, it might help to just throw in a little stitch marker here in the middle, just so you can make sure that it's evenly distributed. And we're gonna go ahead and do a little whip stitch across this edge as well. And you can do this with right sides held together, or you can do it right side out, which is how I'm doing it. The wrong sides are held together. That's how I'm doing it here. Either way works just fine. All right. Just a couple more stitches here. And then the next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna create that ribbed band that goes around the face opening. So lucky for you, you already know how to do that. That is just more of the same stitch pattern that we used when we made the gaiter. So this time though, you're gonna use the same hook size you used for the hood part. Okay, so the larger of the two hooks that you're using in this project. And you're going to make just sort of like a long strip, but it's exactly the same. technique, the same way of making it as when you created this, which I showed you before. So you're going to make a very long rectangle. It's going to look like this with that yarn over slip stitch through the back loop only. And once you have finished that, you're going to slip stitch seam them together. And we've already done that as well because you guys did that same step on the gaiter. So we're just going to chain one, turn as if we're working another row. I'm going to bring that foundation chain up in front, and we're going to do a slip stitch across, all the way across. So I'm just working, again, I'm just working through that back loop of each edge to make that slip stitch. And this seam, I like to put the seam at the bottom of the face, so it ends up actually being between the two grommets. So just kind of keep in mind that's where it's going to go, kind of down by your chin. So I'm going to chain one, and I'm going to open this up so that my slip stitch seam is actually on the inside. Now we're going to consider this the right side of our piece. I'm going to put a stitch marker in here, and then I'm going to show you how to add those grommets. Okay. So normally I would do this on a cement floor because it really does help to have a nice solid thing to hammer into. So I take a little chunk of wood, this little chunk of wood, and I put it on my basement floor, cement floor. That works the best, but if you have a very solid work table, that's great too, just anything. So this might take me a little bit longer to get my grommets in just because I'm not doing it on a super solid surface. I mean, the table's solid enough, but it's not, it's no cement floor. So we're going to be placing these grommets in from the right side to the wrong side with this longer, the piece that has like the height to it. And I'm going to be putting it in, you know, 1.5 inches or 2 inches away from that center seam, which is right here. I'm just eyeballing this because it doesn't actually really matter exactly how far from the seam it is. It's just how far you want it to be, just visually. And I'm going to place this in about 3 stitches away from the edge. And now we didn't actually make a space there because I wanted this to be very tight so the grommet can't come out. So after 3 stitches, you can kind of see those 3 posts, 1, 2, 3. I'm kind of just making a little hole there with my finger. You definitely want to, you know, do this with care. You don't want to actually break the yarn, but the yarns that I've chosen are quite stiff. And now you can make it just fit. You just want to kind of push it through, and then we're going to add this section on top. The rounded side should be out, and then we're going to place that on this little bit here. Just make sure you have the correct size. So this should just fit right in there. And then we have this tool. I had to screw in the end to make it be the proper size here because of this size comes with larger grommets too. So you just have to make sure you have the smaller end in there for the smaller grommets because that's what we're using. So this is going to be seated right down inside there. You can just hold that nice and flat and then hit it with the hammer. I'm going to have to hit it a few times. And I can see it's still sticking up just a little bit on this side. I'm going to do it again. And that's what it looks like. Nice and hammered in. And you want to make sure, as you're doing this, you want to make sure there's just enough fabric here that you can stitch into it because we're going to be doing a little bit of prep work before we actually stitch this into our hood. So now we would add our second grommet over here. So same distance away from that center seam and about 3 stitches away from the edge. And you just kind of push it on through. So if you were not using these grommets and you wanted to, you could do a little chain 1 and skip a stitch about here and about here as you're working up that strip. So you'd work maybe, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe on your 6th or 7th row, you would do a chain 1 space, and then you'd continue making your ribbing, and then when you're almost done, you could do another chain 1 space. Make sure it's on the same edge though. You know, you want them either both to be here or both to be here, doesn't matter which way. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna add this grommet in here again. place that there. Place, whoops, wrong size. Place this right there, and we're going to hit it with the hammer. That's pretty good. So that gets all rounded and flattened, and that's going to stay in place. And that's going to protect our yarn as our drawstring goes in and out of it. And now, to do our little prep work before we sew this in to make a neat and tidy edge and to kind of help everything ease into the right place, what we're going to do is we're going to fold this little strip in half like this. Okay, so the long way we're going to fold it, and we're going to work into our edges. So I'm going to work through this ridge here, and I'm going to make a single crochet, and I'm working through both edges here. So here and the edge behind. I'm going to make a single crochet there. And now there's a groove between ridges, and we're going to do 2 single crochets through both thicknesses here. And then here's a ridge, and I'm going to go through that ridge and make a single crochet. And then we're going to do 2 single crochets in the valley between ridges. There's a little ridge here. You can barely see it on the outside of that grommet. So basically what we're doing is 1 single crochet in each ridge, 2 single crochets in the space between ridges. So 1, 2, 1, 2, all the way around. And what that's going to do is it's kind of spread out this edge just a little bit, and it's going to fit into our hood really nicely and give us a nice edge to sew to. Let me show you what that looks like. So it's this little guy. Showed you this earlier. So you can see how it kind of makes that donut shape. It flares out because we have extra single crochet stitches, and that's going to help us insert this into our hood opening. So let me bring the hood opening over here. So here is our opening. I'll fold this flat here, and then we're going to we want these grommets to be straddling that seam line. Okay, so this is like the center of our edge. That's going to be right here at the center of our opening down by the chin. Oh, I should actually just fasten this off here. This was my last stitch of the round, and then you can go ahead and make a little slip stitch to that first stitch. And then you're going to fasten off with a nice long yarn tail because you're going to use that for seaming. Like as long as you can stand it. But also you can, if it drives you nuts to have a very long yarn tail, that's okay. You can certainly add another strand of yarn as you're sewing it together. All right, so we're going to be pinning with our stitch markers this, where that seam is, that's going to match up with the very center of our hood. And then we're going to fold this flat, and then we're going to match this up with the top, that seam right there. Like that. And then we can go ahead and just sort of find a good halfway point. Let's see. Where we can pin that together right there. And pin it together here as well. So I'm just trying to place some pins in there just to kind of get it to sit in the right spot. And we'll do the same thing to the opposite side. All right. All right, so that is pinned in place, and then we can go ahead and just use our yarn tails or add another piece of yarn if you need to, and go ahead and whip stitch that in. So I normally just do this with the right side facing out, but if you feel like it looks better, you can turn it wrong side out and do your whip stitches that way. But just make sure you're going through each stitch in this ribbed edge right here in the casing, and then wherever it kind of connects to within that hood opening. So right now I'm actually stitching into the tops of some stitches because we have some for that short distance where we left it open for the face. But most of sewing this in is going to be stitching it into the sides of our row ends. All right, so you would just continue doing this whip stitch all the way around. See, now we're kind of getting into those side edges where our, the ends, our row ends basically. So you're just gonna, kind of reach in there with your needle and try to find a space that is fairly dense to stitch into. Don't just grab one loop because that might actually create a little bit of a hole. So try to grab 2 loops or 2 strands, I guess, from the hooded side or the hood side. And you'll just continue making these whip stitches all the way around, stitching everything in place. And your hood will look, about like that once you get it all stitched in. And then you're gonna make sure that you thread your little string through. So this string is made with just a very long chain, and then you do 1 row of making slip stitches, and then the next row slip stitches through the back loop only. That's all it is, and it creates this nice thick corded edge here. So that's it's very simple to do, and I do have a measurement in there, but it should be longer than the distance it needs to travel here and come out, because you're going to tie some knots on the end so that they can't fall within. They can't get pulled back into that casing. So you're just going to use a pin and go ahead and put it inside your casing, and you can feel the head of your pin, and you can kind of just push it along through. Now this is, maybe a little bit trickier to do than if you were a sewer. You can do this with a pin and elastic and sending it through a casing. You just have to be careful that you're not, it is possible to push your pin right out through between your stitches. So just kind of be feeling for that with your fingers as you're pushing it through. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be resisting too much. If it's resisting, don't just force it, because your pin might actually come out. Then you'll have to pull it back in. And what I mean by that is like, see, I could actually pop my pin out right here, but I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to continue threading that through till it comes out the other hole, and then you can just tie a little overhand knot. I wanted to let you guys know too, I am going to do another live event in a little over 15 minutes where I am talking about some ornament ideas. I've got some holiday ornaments. I've been getting requests for making more holiday ornaments and also for making amigurumi. So it's kind of combining those 2 things together. So if you guys are interested in that, it is another free tutorial. Well, it's not really a tutorial. It's more like a show and tell, a little bit of a tutorial, but so that's coming up very soon. All right, so you'll just thread that on through and then tie an overhand knot on each side so that it can't slip on out. And then your hooded gaiter is done, and it's a warm. And if you needed to do a little extra blocking, you could do a little bit more steam blocking if you feel like it needed it. All right, so that concludes our tutorial today. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Hopefully I'll see some of you guys in just a little bit when we're talking about ornaments. Bye, everyone.